Welcome guys, I'm TJ. Welcome back to New Zealand Mysteries. We're all about giving a voice to those who have been silenced. This week has been a rough week in New Zealand. I just want to take a moment to acknowledge the homicides we've had, the hit and runs we've had, the kids, babies dying, homicides. It's been a tough week for New Zealand, and I'm not sure whether it's to do with coming out of lockdown or what, but New Zealand's a bit of a mess at the moment. That's what I think. So we're going to be looking at two cases in this video. We're going to be looking at the unsolved murder of Kevin O'Loughlin, which happened in Nelson in 1993, and also the unsolved murder of Jordan Voudouris in Paeroa. He was a pizza man, had a pizza shop there, Mykonos, and that was in 2012. But before we get into these cases, a few things about the channel. We are on Facebook, YouTube, and every good place where you listen to your podcast. Just search for New Zealand Mysteries. If you have any case suggestions, you can send me an email at nzmissing@gmail.com. Our website is newzealandmissing.wordpress.com. We have an extensive database of missing persons and unsolved cases in New Zealand and some from around the world. We also have on there links to the sources we use, any photos, and lots of other information. There's ways you can support the channel by sharing these stories as far and as wide as you can. The idea is we want to get these stories in front of the people that need to see them, those people that need to come forward after all this time or know something and can offer some information. You can also make a donation or sponsor the channel by going to buymeacoffee.com, Patreon, or the Kiwibank New Zealand Mysteries account. Any help is appreciated, even $1, and that goes towards a lot of things, including promotion of the stories on Facebook so they get seen by as many people as possible. Of course, if you like this content, please subscribe, hit the like button, and make sure you hit the notification bell and hit all so you get notified when we release stories. If you know or have any information about the cases that I feature or any other cases on the channel, you can call Crimestoppers on 0800 555 111. You can go to crimestoppers-nz.org and you can remain anonymous. Lastly, before we get started, I genuinely do not mean to cause any hurt or disrespect to any family members or friends or anyone else involved in these stories. It's all information obtained online from news outlets. My aim is to give a voice to those who the public may have forgotten in the hope that we can finally get some justice. Let's talk about the first case. Kevin O'Loughlin was murdered in 1993, and because it was so long ago, there is limited information about the case that is online. However, I have found a couple of articles that do go through the information. Let's take a look. First, we're going to nzherald.co.nz. It's an article by Scott Ingalls. Kevin O'Loughlin had finished dancing and left the nightclub alone. It was about 3 a.m. Sunday, and the last songs of the night could be heard around Nelson's Central City drinking holes. Dark-haired, 6-foot-tall Kevin walked along Halifax Street and into Montgomery car park, where he strolled past the public toilets. And we'll quickly just take a look about Nelson. Nelson is situated at the top of the South Island of New Zealand. Nelson, its Maori name Whakatu, is a city on the eastern shores of Tasman Bay. Nelson is the oldest city in the South Island and the second oldest settled city in New Zealand. Nelson City has a population of around 50,000, making it New Zealand's 12th most populous city. Kevin had had a few drinks but was not inebriated. He was probably heading to Hardy Street, the next road over, to grab some takeaways or catch one of the taxis queued up in the rank. But 30-year-old Kevin never made it. Instead, a taxi driver found his lifeless body near the car park's Hardy Street entrance. He had been stabbed up to 7 times in his back and shoulder and had a laceration across his forehead. In another article we'll look at soon, it says he was stabbed 6 times, but Yeah. Kevin, married and the third of 4 boys, was born and raised in Te Anau and attended Fiordland College. His mother, 78-year-old Elsie, remembers him being a mouthy person, but he was never a person who got into fights. Like his father Terence, he became a builder and also played rugby and squash. He got married and had 2 girls before splitting with his wife. He had his 3rd child with his de facto partner Leanne. They lived in Nelson but separated just before his death. On that fateful Saturday night, Kevin called a taxi which picked him up about 8 p.m. from his Taitoki Street home and took him into town, where several hundred others were also having a night out. The last nightclub or club they went to that night was Horatio's nightclub in Halifax Street, and after that he walked to his death. Detective Richard Lowe, now in charge of the case, said police were unable to find a motive or any suspects. They were also unable to find the small, easily hidden knife used to kill Mr. O'Loughlin. Police do not know if he knew his attackers, had an altercation with strangers, or was ambushed from behind, because they do not know which of his wounds was inflicted first. His partner Leanne said at the time that Kevin was a hard worker with lots of friends and she knew of no one who would want to kill him. For up to 6 weeks, a murder squad interviewed more than 1,000 people, hunted for the murder weapon and other clues, desperately searching for the one lead that would help them nail the case. But the trail became colder and the inquiry was scaled down. Detective Lowe says the police received strong support from the community and media. Occasionally someone rings Detective Lowe with some information, but never enough to put an end to the disappointment he feels over the case. He says, "I never give up. Imagine what the perpetrator should be feeling. He's the one who should be tossing and turning in bed." Mr. O'Loughlin, Kevin's mum, Elsie, has most weeks since her boy's murder visited his Te Anau grave, which is actually next to his mate Trevor, who was killed in a car accident about 12 hours after Kevin died. It's nice that they're buried side by side. We're going now to stuff.co.nz, an article written by Jessica Long, and that was in June 2017. Mystery remains, murdered man Kevin O'Loughlin Nelson's unsolved homicide. It is 24 years since Kevin O'Loughlin was stabbed 6 times and found lifeless in a pool of his own blood. It was a ferocious killing that shook Nelson. It was a Saturday night in May 1993. Whitney Houston, Billy Joel and Michael Jackson topped New Zealand's singles charts. Jim Bolger was Prime Minister, and the Nelson Evening Mail would soon be asked to help police hunt for a murderer. Hundreds of people expecting to enjoy an ordinary night out in Nelson would wake up to the news of a killing that remains one of the town's biggest mysteries. The night of his death was just another night out for Kevin, a self-employed father of 3, ready to soak up the 90s nightlife. The 30-year-old dressed in a pair of grey corduroy trousers and a dark-coloured shirt. He pulled on a black jacket with white flashes on the pockets and collar and a pair of calf-length grey cowboy boots. And I guess this doesn't really sound like the most trendiest outfit, but I'm sure back in 1993 it was fine. His friend Bill Marshall was visiting from his hometown Te Anau. That's where Kevin was from. They visited 4 clubs that night, but as late night turned to early morning, they went to Horatio's. Once a humming nightclub, this would be the last place that Kevin was seen alive. So we've got a little bit of a diagram here. Hardy Street's down here. This is where he was found. But there was also blood over here, and it's like he staggered through there. Early investigations led police to believe that Kevin was near the corner of Hardy Street and Montgomery Car Park when someone confronted him with a weapon. At some point, an attacker stabbed him 6 times. So 6 times in this article, 7 on the other, but I don't think that's too weird. One wound pierced his heart, killing him in minutes. This was less than 30 minutes since he left the nightclub. His lifeless body was found by a taxi driver about 3:30 a.m, lying face down at the entrance of the busy Montgomery Square car park off Hardy Street. Detective Inspector Lloyd Jones said in the weeks to come the people of Nelson were appalled by the ferocity of the attack. It was understood there was at least one witness to the fatal stabbing. Police can still only roughly piece together what happened on the night that Kevin was killed. So who was Kevin O'Loughlin? Kevin James O'Loughlin was a 30-year-old father of 3, a partner, son and friend. The self-employed Nelson-based carpenter was a part Māori, 6 feet tall, which is 183 centimetres, and of solid build with dark hair. O'Loughlin was the third of 4 sons of Terry and Elise O'Loughlin from Te Anau, and his father said they were a close-knit family. O'Loughlin never fought much, but he was a bit outspoken at times. His tongue used to flap around pretty freely, his dad said. 9 days after his death, O'Loughlin's life was remembered in a joint funeral at Te Anau Hall. His lifelong friend Trevor was killed in a motor crash the same weekend, so they were farewelled side by side. About 700 friends and family shared stories of Kevin's life. They said he was a strong man with a kind nature, a man dedicated to his work and family, with strong connections throughout the region. His brother Michael said Kevin's death was like a cloud passing over the sun. Nelson Evening Mail coverage of the funeral said that Kevin's de facto partner left the memorial service holding their 2-year-old Hayley's hand and carried wreaths and a picture of her former partner. It had been just a week since she had pleaded with the public in the Mail to help with the homicide investigation, fearful her partner's killer would strike again. She said at the time, "Anyone who could do that is a mongrel. It's scary to know that there's someone out there vicious enough to do that to another human being." Her former partner was a sensitive yet strong-minded man who never bothered anyone, she said in that earlier interview. He was a conscientious worker with a lot of friends. She knew nobody who had reason to kill him. The couple had recently separated, but when he wasn't working, he was spending time with his kids. She was never able to uncover the answers she searched for. She and her youngest daughter, Hayley, moved to Australia with Kevin's stepchildren. Kevin's 3 children are no closer to knowing who attacked and brutally killed their father. They called on the public to hand over information to police in hopes of bringing them closer to finding their father's killer. Despite police interviewing hundreds of people, a reconstruction of the case on television through 90s Crime Watch, and controversial sentencing murder programs, advertisements with detailed information and a $20,000 reward, there have been no answers. Police would later say that Kevin was just your Joe average guy. He'd lived in Nelson for about 5 years. They say in this one that his friend Ben Marshall and him first visited the Wakatu Hotel on Collingwood Street, then the Metro Hotel, which is now downtown back as an accommodation on Bridge Street, before they went on to the Cactus Club next door. They headed to Horatio's on Halifax Street together when the pair decided to leave just after 3 a.m. when it was closing time, and both men went their separate ways as Marshall had something to do. An acquaintance in a car outside the club saw Kevin leave Horatio's at closing time. After Marshall and Kevin split up, police believe that Kevin crossed Halifax Street after leaving Horatio's. From there he walked through the MS Ford car yard, close to where the hunting and fishing store is now located. He crossed Achilles Ave to Wakatu Lane and walked through the Nelson bus depot to the Montgomery car park. At some point, an attacker confronted him with a weapon. He was stabbed in the shoulder and chest, and his forehead was slashed, leaving a 15-centimetre wound. It's thought that when he turned to run, he fell, along with the fatal wound to his heart. Kevin was stabbed 3 times in the back. This article said he was bashed with a blunt instrument, but I can't find confirmation of that anywhere else. There was no evidence that he had attempted to defend himself. Reports in the Mail said bloodstains near his body showed that he staggered towards the car park and slid down the wall of the Hardy's Bar and TAB, which was then Dick Smith's, before collapsing. A pool of blood on the footpath beside Led Zeppelin tailed across the Montgomery car park by the toilet block to his body on Hardy Street. Kevin's wallet, containing a small amount of cash, was found on him. When the incident unfolded, there was a few nightclubs across the road that were open. A Nelson City taxi driver was waiting outside Friar Tuck's. She drove past the body lying on the Hardy Street pavement a couple of times, but thought it was just another drunk who had collapsed. There had been more than 200 people in the area between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. Police were alerted to the incident by the taxi company at 3:30 a.m. The police investigation revealed several groups of people walking past his body about 3:15 a.m. thinking he was asleep. 2 people were seen leaning over the body about 3:20 a.m. The couple was later described as a short, stocky Maori woman and a European man. Another person wearing a bush jacket or sweat top was also seen near the body. Police media liaison officer Sergeant Mark Chillingworth said the attacker was a person with a mission, someone who was intent on injuring the victim. He said the ferocity of the wounds would indicate that whoever attacked him did so with a vengeance. It was unlikely the killing was a case of mistaken identity. It was more likely a random attack or the offender had a grudge against him, Chillingworth said. Soon after Kevin's death, Nelson police spoke out over concerns of inner-city crime. They said there had been a rash of violent incidences and the city was suffering from an increase in serious crime-related activities. A week after the killing, police announced they had recently seized a large number of knives. None of them matched the murder weapon. So a refresher that they've put on here. In 2005, police made a fresh effort to solve the then 12-year-old homicide when technology breakthroughs opened a new chance of catching his killer. Officers took DNA samples from suspects and were able to build a profile of the murderer. For the first time, the killer was revealed to be a man, and the samples suggested only one person killed Kevin. In 2003, in April, police sent blood samples and exhibits from the crime scene to ESR scientists to be analysed. It took over 8 months for results to be returned because the case was no longer a priority. They then gathered bodily fluid samples from suspects of the original inquiry, some of whom were still in Nelson, while others had moved and at least one was overseas. Police said at the time one of the suspects was a man who had committed suicide, but police later ruled him out. Despite every effort, the DNA did not reveal who killed Kevin O'Loughlin. To this day, police have no witnesses to the stabbing, no evidence linking anyone to the crime, no murder weapon, and no motive. Nelson police said it may seem unlikely to some this horrendous crime will ever be solved, but for Nelson police, these things aren't forgotten. They remain hopeful the missing link will one day turn up. The file is still here, it's open, and pieces of information have been added over the years. A vital piece of information could still come in, he said. If you have any information about the unsolved murder of Kevin O'Loughlin, if you were around Central City of Nelson in 1993 and you have heard something or someone has mentioned something, anything, please call Crimestoppers 0800 555 111 and let them know. It's time for Kevin's kids to know what happened to their dad and why. Let's move on to our next case. We're going to now take a look at the unsolved murder of Jordan Voudouris, and this happened in Paeroa, which is in the North Island of New Zealand, near the top there. Paeroa is a small town in New Zealand that lies in the Hauraki district, located at the base of the Coromandel Peninsula. Paeroa had a population of 3,888 at the 2013 New Zealand census. So it definitely isn't a big place.
Devastating. You do not move on. You learn to live with the pain. For me, life keeps flowing like a river. You flow with it, but now and then you have to pull the boat to shore and rest a while. Christmas time, Mum hangs Papa's stocking, and we write a happy memory of him. And we put it in his stocking, and over the years we look back and we read those memories. Papa loved the community, and they loved him. They called him a legend. The flowers, gifts and tributes outside his shop showed how much of a presence he was in that community. They know our struggles and our achievements. You know, where friendships have broken down and you know something, we ask you to come forward. There's just not enough people talking about it, not people. We feel that, you know, it's probably being hidden and covered up quite well, and until people break these liaisons and relationships, then something will possibly come. Maybe this interview might spark something. That's our hope. I've always been realistic with the children, and, you know, like we say, we've never lost hope, and somebody someday will talk.
That was a heartfelt message from his family. We're looking now at stuff.co.nz, an article by Philippa Yeldon on October the 19th, 2018. New details revealed in unsolved killing of Pairoa pizza man Jordan Voudouris. Spiros Voudouris celebrated his 18th birthday by having a beer with his dad. It should have been a drink at a Pairoa bar, yet he found himself taking a swig at his father's grave. He was only 11 years old when his dad was gunned down at the back of his pizzeria in the antiques town of Pairoa on the Hauraki Plains. His killer or killers are yet to be brought to justice. That is what we're going to do when he was alive, was go to a bar and have a beer, his son said. Instead, 6 years of family memories have been taken from the Voudouris children. Christmas, birthdays and weddings have gone by. With everyone, there's a sadness. When Sophia married her husband, it should have been her father on her arm. She said Papa should have been there in some awkward, uncomfortable suit to walk me down the aisle and say silly jokes. He should have given me away and waltzed with me at our father and daughter dance. That day was stolen from me, from us. Speaking for the first time in years, his former partner, Richmond, and children say they've never given up faith. Police will make an arrest. They say our hope is that the killers are caught and held accountable, and that we will go on with our lives and dreams, just like Papa wanted us to. It was a wintry Sunday night in June 2012. Jordan closed up Mykonos on the main drag around 10 p.m. He sat at his computer before closing it down at 1:30 a.m. Sometime between then and 4:30 a.m. a fatal shot was fired from a .22 caliber firearm. The 55-year-old's body was found the next day at the entranceway of the driveway, about 25 metres from the rear of the store and upstairs flat where he lived. He wasn't shot where he died. He likely stumbled forward 15 metres, possibly in search of help, to where he was discovered by a neighbouring antiques dealer on the Monday morning. The front doors to the restaurant were locked, and police say all of the activity on the night happened at the back. As day broke over Pairoa, news trickled onto the streets that the legendary pizza man had been killed. It was another month before police revealed he was shot, and this week police confirmed for the first time it was a .22 caliber firearm. Police are looking for this firearm, appealing to anyone who may have received or found an unexplained .22 caliber firearm of any type in the Pairoa area or Greater Waikato around the time of Jordan's death. In the early days, Detective Senior Sergeant Dean Anderson who is in charge of the investigation now, says more than 40 investigative staff worked on the case. It took 8 days to complete a full forensic examination at the back entrance of Hall Street. Former work and income officers were transformed into a hub for Operation Olive. More than 400 witnesses were interviewed and re-interviewed in the first year. A $50,000 reward was offered the following February, netting masses of information but no solid outcomes. Meat had previously been stolen from the restaurant's freezer and those of neighbouring businesses. A friend had warned Jordan to lock his gate. Police will still not reveal if Voudouris had money in his pockets or whether anything was stolen that night. There was also talks that a former employee of his that had been fired was a suspect, but he was cleared. Anderson says there's no clear motive for the killing, but it's likely those responsible intended to be at that location. But it remains speculative as to whether Jordan was an intended target, Anderson says. He says it may not have been the intended outcome to the planned activity and things went terribly wrong extremely quickly. Richmond and her family can't imagine anyone would intentionally hurt their father. He was such a nice guy. We have never heard of anybody that didn't like him. In the Pairoa community, people knew if they went to Jordan, they would get help. Police say it's likely the killer confided in others about their intentions that night. They may have started acting differently, upset, angry, or highly nervous. He says, I have no doubt someone feels uncomfortable in the prospect that their silence continues to deprive Jordan's family their right to answers. Unsolved murders leave the community, families and police frustrated. They're left wondering as to the reasons for the death, whether those responsible remain in their communities, and it causes extreme and unnecessary stress to many. Jordan's death shattered the tight-knit town of Pairoa that only weeks earlier earned the Community of the Year award. So many people, everyone knew him. We were blown away when we went to Pairoa to speak to the community. Then they held a concert and raised funds. A little bit about Jordan, his childhood. He had a hard childhood on the streets of Athens that made neighbourly towns alluring. His mother died when he was young and he was sent to an orphanage with his brothers. By 8 years old, he was selling lotto tickets and cigars and making coffee runs for local businessmen on the streets. He wanted to see the world, so he joined the Merchant Navy and followed his older brother to New Zealand, settling here in 1981. He met his partner then through mutual friends, and the pair had 3 children. Jordan was a tinkerer. He always had a project on the go, whether it was fixing up BMWs or building furniture. For a man of little education, he could fix anything. The couple separated around 9 years before his death, but maintained a good relationship for the children. Days were spent sitting outside his pizzeria or taking a drive to the beaches around. His daughter says Papa was a passionate man. He was a devoted and loving father who would always try his best to be there for school productions or a hockey game. Each year the kids celebrate Father's Day and Easter, but instead of laughing and eating with their papa, they visit his grave. They say we think it hasn't been solved because there's not enough evidence, not enough people talking about it, and they have a message for whoever stole their papa away. How do you live with yourself? Are you that cold-hearted? Or maybe you have a conscience and can't live with the guilt anymore. Turn yourself in. You can't hide forever. Anderson is hopeful that as time passes and people's loyalties change, those that carry the burden of Jordan's death will come forward. He said those responsible may have differing views on what occurred. Those they have confided in may finally realise that their silence only aggravates the grief suffered by Jordan's family, and that the family should be offered some explanations for the loss of Jordan. It may well be the person or persons responsible will finally obtain the courage to stand up and accept responsibility for their actions, although I am realistic that for some, concealment of their guilt outweighs their moral obligation to take responsibility for their actions. And there's some contact information which I'll put on the website and in the description box below. Unfortunately, the pizza box, I think it was called, after Mykonos, was actually destroyed in a fire in July 2019. A major blaze ripped through the pizza box on Belmont Road at 9:15 p.m. on July 12th. 7 years earlier, the store's then owner, 55-year-old Jordan Voudouris, was gunned down at the back of the shop. His killing remains unsolved. Police said following a scene examination, the fire was being treated as suspicious. Initial inquiries indicated there was no connection to the murder of Jordan Voudouris. Police, however, are appealing for information of anyone who saw or heard anything suspicious in the area on that evening. And of course, there again is the Crimestoppers number. We're at newshub.co.nz. An article in 2015, police yet to crack pizza store murder. Police say they're confident they'll catch whoever killed Pyroa pizza store owner Jordan Voudouris, despite having no motive, no weapon, and having made no arrests. He was shot dead outside his work, and friends are desperate for answers and closure. Friend and neighbour Vivian Leonard said someone needs to be held accountable for his death. It's just not good not knowing where this person is that's done this. Someone needs to be held accountable. And she says she thinks of Jordan every day. Detective Sergeant Dean Anderson says police are frustrated at the lack of information they can provide to the family. He says, I simply believe that the people who have intimate knowledge of what happened on that night probably need to reflect on their own values and come forward and talk to us and help us solve it for the family in particular, he said. Mr. Voudouris was remembered as a kind, larger-than-life businessman known for his laughter and love for his family. He was Pyroa's pizza man, and the people there now want justice. If you have any information about what happened to Mr. Voudouris on that night, please call Crimestoppers 0800 555 111. Or if you have any information about the unsolved murder of Kevin O'Loughlin in Nelson in 1993, please do the right thing and come forward. Get it off your chest. Give these families some answers, maybe some closure that they desperately need. It's been far too long. Thank you very much for hanging around and listening to the story of Kevin and Jordan. It's been great to have you here. I'd love to have you around next time as well. Thank you very much. I'm out.